Hey, I'm Hunter from Skillthrive, and in this video, we're going to build this professional resume using only HTML and CSS. Before we get started, I want to mention that this tutorial is from a free code challenge on skillthrive.com. When you download code challenges from Skillthrive, you will get access to professionally designed Figma files that you can use to build projects and practice your web development skills. I encourage you to download the file and try building this project yourself, and use this tutorial as a reference in case you get stuck or want to see how I approach this challenge. Why? Because I believe the best way to learn is to apply what you're learning to real-world projects. Plus, you can apply your own approach, frameworks, and languages to acquire the skills you desire. With that out of the way, let's talk about what you'll need to know and have installed before getting started. First, you'll need to have a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. By no means do you need to be proficient in either, but you should know what HTML elements are and how CSS is applied to HTML in order to style web elements. If this is your first time with HTML or CSS, I'll be sure to include some resources below for you to review first. I'll be using VS Code as my code editor for this project. It's free to use, but you're welcome to use another code editor if you prefer. However, I will be using some VS Code extensions in this video, so alternatives may not be available in other editors. The first extension I'll be using is Live Server. This will allow us to create a development server on our machine that will live reload whenever we make changes in our code. Last, we'll be using Prettier to format our code on save. If you don't have Prettier set up yet, I'll include a link below to a short tutorial on how to get that installed. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. Create a folder on your computer where you want your project to be. Then open the folder in VS Code by dragging it into the application or opening it from inside the application by going to File, Open Folder. Once VS Code opens, let's create an index.html file, which is where our homepage will be for our website. I'll also go ahead and create a new folder called CSS. In this folder, I'm going to add two files, reset.css and styles.css. The last folder we'll create is for our fonts. I'll take the fonts from the project download and drag them into this folder. Now we're ready to start writing the HTML. First, make sure you're inside your index.html file. VS Code comes with a tool called Emmet pre-installed. Essentially, Emmet is just a plugin that makes it easier to write HTML and CSS using a shorthand syntax. But a shortcut that's useful for creating a new HTML file is to do an exclamation point followed by enter or return. This will create boilerplate for your new HTML file. The first thing I want to change is inside this title tag is to replace this with the title of our website. In this case, it's the name of the person followed by a short description of what the website is going to be. The first thing we'll do is add some meta tags inside the head element. This is by no means all the meta tags that you'll use in your web development career. But it's a good idea to get started with meta tags so you know what they are and why they're useful. Essentially, meta tags tell search engines what your web page is about. So it's important to include them so when search engines like Google come across your website and index them, it actually knows what information it needs to display on Google. A tool you can use to generate these tags is a free meta tag generator from SEO Optimer. On this website, we can enter a title, a description of the web page, as well as some keywords. Down here, you can decide if you want your website to be indexed and if links should be followed. If you're using this for a live production site, you should select yes. However, because this is a tutorial, I don't want this indexed by Google, so I'll go ahead and select no. Once you have all these options, go ahead and click on Generate Meta Tags. Scroll down, select the meta tags, copy them, head back to your project, and beneath the title, let's go ahead and paste these here. Then we'll go ahead and save our file. The next thing we want to do is add some CSS resets inside of our project. Developers use CSS resets because different browsers have different default styles for HTML elements, which can lead to inconsistencies in the look and behavior of a website. By using a CSS reset, developers can standardize the default styles across all browsers and reduce the need to write browser-specific styles. You could write your own CSS resets, but there's also some out-of-the-box solutions. One that's really popular is normalize.css. In this project, we'll be using res, which actually adds styles on top of normalized CSS to have a more modern CSS reset approach. You can check out the link to this GitHub to learn more about res as well as normalize.css. But what we need to do from this GitHub repo is to scroll up, select this res.css, click here to copy all the values inside of it. Then we'll head back to our project, into reset.css, and we'll paste that CSS here and then save our project. The next thing we want to do is import this reset.css file into our main styles.css file. So we'll head to our styles.css file, and at the top, we'll use the import syntax to import the reset.css URL. You can see here from the syntax that the // is the current folder and reset.css is the name of the file. In order to use the CSS in our project, our HTML file needs to know where the CSS is. So we'll head back into our HTML. Underneath the meta tag, we'll go ahead and import the CSS. Again, we'll use emit to create a shortcut in order to create this tag for us. First, we'll type out link. Then using the arrow down, I'll select this CSS and click enter. In the href attribute, we need to go ahead and tell our HTML where our styles.css file is. So we'll go ahead and change this to styles. And at the beginning, we need to put CSS/, saying that this is in the CSS folder and the name of the file is styles.css. Now our HTML will know about the styles inside of our project. The next thing we need to do is define our typefaces inside of our CSS. We can do that inside of our styles.css file. In order to define the typefaces, we can use the @fontface rule from CSS. The @fontface rule is used to define a custom font by specifying the font name, the font source, which is usually a URL to the font file, the font format, and different font style information like normal, block, among other attributes. In this case, the URL for our fonts are local because they're inside the fonts folder, which is inside of our project. Typically, you'll hear that local fonts are faster because they're not making any requests to a URL that's off of your website. However, this is sometimes not true, but we won't get into much of the details, but essentially it boils down to whether or not your web host is using a CDN. In this case, our final project is going to be hosted on Vercel. Luckily, Vercel takes care of the CDN and caching for us, so that's nothing we have to worry about, so we can rest assured that our font is going to be delivered fast for our users. The first thing we have to define is the font family, which in this case is the name of enter. Then we need to define where the font is on our project. In this case, we need to go up one folder to the fonts folder and then select the file that we want. We'll be using a WOFF or Web Open Format 2 file, which is a compact file format for web fonts. It's designed to provide font files that are highly compressed and optimized for use on websites. According to caniuse.com, 96% of global users have a browser that supports this. So unless your project has a different audience and you know that they don't have browsers that support this file format, this should be good enough. After we define the URL, the next thing we need to say is what type of format this file is. In this case, the WOFF2. Even though this has a wide range of support, let's go ahead and create a fallback for this font. To do that, we write a comma, then the new URL to the fallback font, in this case, the WOFF format. We also need to define that format as well. The next thing we need to do is define the font weight, and because this is a regular font weight, the font weight will be set to 400. This means anytime we refer to the font weight 400, our CSS is going to know to use this font. The next thing we need to define is the font style, which we'll set to normal. In typography, the normal style of a font is its default appearance without any stylistic changes such as italicization or obliquing. And last, there's one more thing we need to define, and that is the font display, which in this case we'll set to swap. Font display is a CSS property that allows you to specify how a web font should be displayed by the browser while it's loading. It determines how the browser handles the situation when the font file has not yet been loaded and applied to the page. The possible values for font display are auto, block, swap, fallback, and optional. I won't get into the details of how these actually work, but I'll link some resources in the description if you want to learn more. Essentially though, if performance is a top priority, you'll want to use optional. If displaying the text quickly is a top priority, you'll want to use swap. And if a top priority is ensuring the text is displayed in a web font, you should use block. In this case, we're going to use swap. The downside of this option is that it could cause layout shift, meaning that once the font actually comes in, the content on our website moves. However, because we're hosting this on Vercel, which is going to have a global CDN network, we really shouldn't have to worry about this on such a simple project. And now that we have our regular font defined, we need to go ahead and define our medium, our semi-bold, and our bold. We'll repeat a similar process, but of course the URL is going to be different as well as the font weight. And now that we've imported all the fonts that we want to use in our project, we have to tell our CSS that we want to use them. And we'll do that inside of the body tag. First, we'll use the font family property, setting the value to the enter font, which is the font family that we defined in our @fontface rule. And we also want to include a fallback, which is the system default sans serif. Because we're using font display swap, it's going to use the fallback for our browser until the actual font is loaded for the user. So it's important to define that fallback here on our body tag. Also, our body tag is going to wrap the rest of our HTML for our project. So by passing it into the body, it's going to be inherited by all the elements nested inside of it. The next thing I want to do is head back to my styles.css file and define some CSS variables. CSS variables are a way of defining reusable values that you can then reference in your styles. This allows you to store values in a single place and then reference them in multiple CSS rules, which can make your style sheets more maintainable and easier to update. Back in our styles.css file, let's go ahead and define some of our CSS variables. The first thing we want to do is define the CSS variables on our root element. The first thing we want to do is define our CSS variables inside of the root selector. The root selector in CSS represents the highest level element in the HTML document, which is typically the HTML element. It's used to set styles that apply globally to the entire document, which is a good place to define our CSS variables because we want to use them throughout our entire CSS. The syntax for creating CSS variables is pretty straightforward. First, they're declared with a double dash. Then it's followed by the name of your CSS variable, which can be the name of anything that you want. However, keep in mind that you can't have spaces on CSS variables. Then you follow the name with a colon and then the value of the CSS variable. In this case, we're going to have a hex code for the white color. Then we'll repeat the process for the rest of the colors in our project. You might be wondering, where are these HTML colors coming from? And they're coming from that Figma file that I mentioned earlier, which you can download from Skillthrive.com. Inside the Figma file, when you have nothing selected, you can come over here and look at your text styles as well as your color styles. If we expand this dropdown, you can see all the colors here. By clicking on this icon, we can view the hex code, copy that, and then paste it into our HTML. There's one more thing I want to do in this section, and that's to create a wrapper element for our app, which will be used to set a background color for our resume. So inside of our index.html and inside of our body, let's go ahead and create a main tag with a class called wrapper, and then make sure we go ahead and include the closing main tag as well. Now that we have this new class called wrapper, we can go ahead and start styling it in our CSS. The main element has a class called wrapper, so we can go ahead and target that here in our styles.css and apply a background color. The background color is going to be using a variable that we just defined in our root element. In order to use a variable, we have to use the variable function, and inside here is where we pass the variable name. In this case, we're going to be using the white variable. Now the wrapper for the main tag has a background color set to white. If you watch the intro to this tutorial, you'll know that I'll be using an extension called Live Server in order to run a development server for this static site. So once you've installed that extension, what I want to do is come over to this index.html file, right-click and select Open with Live Server. Of course, all we're seeing is a white screen because we haven't written anything in our HTML yet, but we can right-click, come down to Inspect, and then we can go ahead and inspect the CSS rendered to our DOM. If we look inside of this body tag, we'll see that we have this main element with the class of wrapper. And if we come over here, we can see the background color being applied and this white variable being set to the background color. Now that we know our HTML is being displayed here on our local server and our CSS is being pulled into the HTML file, let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Now let's create the section for our contact information. The first thing I'm going to do inside the main tag is create a comment that says contact section. An easy way to create a comment in VS Code is use Control/ or Command/ and then type out the comment. I like to break up my HTML with comments like this so it's easy to understand where the beginning and the end of certain sections are in my HTML. Below this comment, let's create an open and close div tag. This div tag is going to have a class called contact. Inside this container, let's create another container with a class of contact container. Inside here, we'll create a header with a class of contact header. Then we'll place an h1 tag with a class of contact name and the name of our person. Below this, we'll put the description for Susan, which is going to be in a paragraph tag with a class called contact description. Outside the header, let's create another div with a class of contact contacts. Inside here is where we're going to put the links to our website, our phone number, and the email. First, let's create a paragraph tag. And inside here, we'll put an anchor tag with a class of contact link. By default, an anchor tag has display set to inline. By wrapping it in a paragraph tag, we're forcing the anchor to take up the full available width. By doing this, we're going to get the items to stack on top of each other like we expect. This anchor tag is going to link to the person's website, so we just need a link to their personal portfolio. Inside the anchor tag, we'll put the text linking to the site. Below this paragraph, we'll create another one with a link inside, but this time it's going to be an email. The mail to href in an anchor tag is used to create a link that opens the default email client on the user's device and pre-populates the recipient's email address. You can even pre-populate the subject line and body of the email, but in this case, we're just using the email address. Inside the anchor tag, of course, we need to put the email for the text. Below, we'll create one final paragraph with an anchor tag inside, but this time it's going to be for a phone number. Similar to the mail to in an href, the tel in an href is used to create the link that opens the default telephone dialer on the user's device and pre-populates the phone number that should be dialed. Inside this anchor tag, we'll put the phone number. Now that the HTML is done for the contact section, let's go ahead and style it with CSS. In our styles file below the wrapper class, let's go ahead and create a comment saying that this is where our contact styles begin. Our first styles is going to be on the contact class, and we're going to set padding. The top is going to be 5 rem, the right 2 rem, bottom 1.5 rem, and the left 2 rem. Below here, we'll target the contact container, and the first class we'll set is display to flex. We'll set gap to 2 rem, which is going to set row and column gap to 2 rem. Below this, we'll set justify content to space between. Then we'll align items to flex end, and we'll set a max width to 67 rem. Then we'll go ahead and set margin to top and bottom of 0 and left to right in auto. What this is going to do, once it reaches the max width of 67 rem, it's going to center the container on the screen. Now let's go ahead and style the contact header. The only property we're going to pass in here is a max width that was set to 32.5 rem. Next, let's go ahead and style the contact name. The first thing we'll do is set color, using the variable function, passing in the variable of neutral 10. We'll set font size to 3 rem, line height to 1, and font weight to 700. Now let's go ahead and style the contact description. Again, we'll set the color to neutral 8, set a margin top to 1 rem, we'll set a font size to 1 rem and line height to 1.5 rem. Last, we'll set the font weight to 400. We want to space out the elements from the contact section by giving it a margin top. In order to apply a margin top to all of the items except for the first one, we can use the child selector, saying that we don't want to select the first child. Then we can go ahead and apply a margin top of 0.25 rem. Again, the not selector means that we're not selecting, passing in then the first child selector, meaning that we're not selecting the first child, meaning that all the other elements besides the first child get this margin top styling. Now we can go ahead and style the links individually. First, we'll set text decoration to none, overriding the default underline. Then we'll change the color to a variable to the neutral 8. We'll set font size to 1 rem, line height to 1.5 rem, and font weight to 400. Now we need to add the styles to the link for when a user hovers over the link and also focuses on the link using a keyboard. To do that, we can use the hover and focus visible pseudo classes. First, we target the contact link, and then on the hover class, as well as on the focus visible, we want to change the color to brand 1. Now when we hover over these values, you'll see that they change. And if we use our keyboard, they'll also change. I want to distinguish when a user uses a keyboard instead of just hovers over it, so let's add a style for focus visible where we change the text decoration to underline. Now when a user uses their keyboard, not only does the color change, but the text decoration also switches to underline. Now that we have our styles applied for larger screens, let's go ahead and add some styles for smaller screens using media queries. First, we need to create a section where we'll define our media queries. So I'll go ahead and add a comment saying this is where the small breakpoints start, and then I'll use the @media, setting the max width to 640 pixels. Like I said previously, we already added styles for the desktop. Now, whenever the user's screen gets to 640 pixels or below, we're going to go ahead and apply the following styles. Again, I'll add a comment saying that this is where the contact styles start. For the contact class, I'll add a padding left and right to 1 rem. On the contact container, I'll set flex direction to column, justify content to flex start, align items to flex start, and I'll set the gap to 1 rem. I also want to make the contact name a little smaller, so I'll target that class, setting the font size to 2.25 rem and line height to 2.5 rem. I want to do something similar for the description by making the font size and line height smaller, and also changing the margin top to 0.75 rem. Last, I want to make the contact links smaller, so I'll go ahead and change their font size and line height as well. Now that our contact section is complete, let's go ahead and move on to the experience section. Let's head back to our index.html file and start working on our experience section. Like we did for the contact section, let's start by making a comment noting that this is where the experience section starts. I'll go ahead and create a section tag, and inside put a class called experience. Inside here, let's create a container and give it a class of experience container. Inside this container, I'll create a header with a class called header, an h2 tag with a class called header title, and pass in the title for this section called experiences. You might notice that the class starts with header instead of experience_header. The reason we're doing this is because this header is specific for this certain component. The reason we're doing this is because this header style is going to be used later under the skills section as well. In other words, this header element isn't specific to the experience section, so we're going to be using it below as well, so the styles are going to be specific to the header class. Now that we've created our header, let's go ahead and create the actual card, which is going to hold all of our information for our specific experiences. Let's go ahead and denote that with a comment where we say experience 1. This is going to be a container with a class of experience item. Now we're going to go ahead and create the elements which are going to hold the bullet point and the styled border. So inside here, we'll create a new container, giving this a class of experience trim. Then we'll create another container with a class called experience marker. This marker, or the larger circle, is going to have a smaller circle in it. So we're going to give this a div and give it a class of experience dot. Last, outside of the experience marker, but still in the experience trim container, we'll create another container giving it a class of experience border. Now technically this won't be styled using a border, but rather just setting a div to a certain width, giving it a background color, but we'll still call it border just because it still looks like a border in this case. Now we can come outside of the experience trim and create another divider, giving it a class of experience details. Inside here, we'll have another header with a class of experience role, and we'll create an h3 tag with a class of experience position, passing in the position for this experience. Then we'll create a paragraph tag, giving it a class of experience company, and pass in the name of the company. Outside the header, we'll create another container with a class of experience period. Inside here, we'll create a paragraph with a class of experience date, passing in the date. Below this paragraph, we'll create another paragraph with a class of experience location, passing in the location for the experience. Then we'll come outside of this experience period, create another paragraph with a class of experience description, passing in the short description for this experience. In this case, we're just using some filler text. Now we need to go ahead and create the bullet points that list all the specific details for the experience. So we'll create an unordered list with a class of experience bullets. Inside here, we'll create a list item with a class of experience bullet, passing in the information for that list item. Then I'll go ahead and create the other two bullets, passing in the information for those bullets as well. We're going to create two more experiences, and it's the same HTML as we did for experience 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this code and then paste it 2 times below, changing the information. Now, as you can see, we have our experience 2 in our HTML. And we also have our experience 3. Now let's go ahead and move on to styling this section. To start styling our experience section, we'll head into our styles.css, and below the contact styles, we'll create a comment saying that this is where our experience styles start. Then we'll target the experience class, and on here we'll set a padding, setting the top and bottom to 3 rem and left to right to 2 rem. Then we'll target the experience container class, setting a max width to 67 rem, setting a margin to top and bottom of 0 and left to right of auto. By setting the margin left and right to auto, this container, once it reaches 67 rem, is going to be centered on the screen. Next, we'll style the experience item, setting the max width to 49 rem. We'll set display to flex and set the column and row gap to 2 rem. Similar to what we did on the contact links, we want every item to have a margin top so the experience sections are spaced between each other. However, we don't want that to be applied to the first section. So again, we can target the experience container, use the child selector, and target the experience item. Again, we want to use the not selector, meaning we don't want to select the first of type. As you recall on the links, instead of using first of type, we used first child. We can't use that here because the div isn't the first child. If we come into our HTML and scroll to the top of our experience section, you'll see that we have our experience class. The first child in this is going to be a header, but the first type of div is going to be the experience item. And this is how we can target this specific experience 1 example and not apply a margin top to this one. Now that that's clear, let's go ahead and add the margin top, setting it to 3 rem. And now you can see a margin top is added to each experience item besides the first one. Now let's go ahead and move on to probably the most difficult part of this tutorial, which is styling the experience trim. This is going to be relying on Flexbox, and anytime the content, the bullets, or the description gets larger, we want this to actually expand to fill the space, and it's going to create the illusion of having this border that fits the space of the content to the right. So to start, let's go ahead and target the experience trim, setting display to flex and flex direction to column. Right now, nothing's changed because we haven't styled any of the items inside. But let's go ahead and set align items to center and a gap to 1 rem and flex to none. The flex none value in CSS sets the flex item to have a fixed width and height. This is important because the experience trim container is going to hold the marker and the dot, and we don't want that to fill the space, but instead we want it to keep the full size of the marker no matter how much content is in each section. Last, we need to add a padding top to this of 0.25 rem. By adding a padding top, we're going to have the bullet to be actually centered to the title of the position. Now let's go ahead and style the experience marker by setting a width to 1.5 rem and a height to 1.5 rem. We'll set a border radius to this very high value, that way ensuring it's always perfectly rounded. Then we'll set a background color to a variable of neutral 3. And now we can see the marker here in our HTML. The dot is going to be centered inside of this marker, and we're going to use Flexbox to center it. So first we need to set display to flex. Then to vertically and horizontally align the children, we'll set align items to center and justify content to center as well. Again, we want the width and height to be fixed, so we'll set flex to none. Now let's go ahead and style the dot. First, we'll set a width and height of 0.5 rem, a border radius again to this high value, ensuring that it's perfectly rounded, and a background color to the variable neutral 10. And as you can see, we now have a dot centered inside of the marker. Now let's go ahead and style the experience border. The first property we'll set is flex, which is a shorthand property for setting flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis in a single line. The first value we'll set is 1 for flex grow and flex shrink as well, meaning that we want this container to take up the full space when it gets bigger or larger. We also want to set flex basis to 0%. This means that the item will have no initial size and will take up the space it needs to fit its content. This is important because as we add more bullet points or change any of the content in the experience section, we want this border to fill the space that's available. Next, we need to go ahead and define how big this needs to be. So we'll set a width to 2 pixels. We'll go ahead and set a background color to the variable neutral 3. And just like that, you can now see the border take place. And the border is stacking top to bottom because on the experience trim class, we set flex direction to column, and it's centered because we set align items to center. Also, the space between the elements is achieved by setting this gap to 1 rem. Next, let's go ahead and style the experience details class, setting the flex to the same that we did for the flex border. Again, this is going to allow the flex item to grow and shrink as needed, ignoring its initial size. The position and company are stacked on top of each other because they're currently block level elements, meaning that they take up the full width available to them. In order to get the effect that they're next to each other, we need to change the default setting for the display property. So to do that, we need to target the experience position and change display to inline block. This isn't going to look like it changes anything for now because we have to add the same inline block display on the experience company class later in the video. So let's go ahead and move on to the rest of the styling. First, we want to change the color to the neutral 10. Then we want to set the font size, line height, and font weight. Now we can go ahead onto our experience company, changing the display to inline block. And now, instead of being stacked on top of each other, you'll see that they're inline. Next, we'll go ahead and change the color to the neutral 6 variable. Because these are inline block, we still have the ability to apply a margin. And I'm just going to give this a little bit of space by adding a margin left to 0.75 rem. Then we'll go ahead and set the font size, line height, and the font weight. On the experience section class, all we're going to do here is add a margin top, spacing it from the title and the company. Next, we'll style the experience date, changing display to inline block as well. We'll change the color, font size, line height, and font weight. Now we'll go ahead and style the experience location, setting display to inline block. Change the color to neutral 6 and also add a margin left of 1 rem. We'll set the font size, line height, and font weight. Next, we can move on to the experience description. We want to add some spacing from the date, so we'll add a margin top to 1 rem, change the color to neutral 8, and set the font size, line height, and font weight. Now we can go ahead and style the individual bullets by setting a margin top to 1 rem, spacing it from the description, ensuring the list style is the disk style, and making a padding left of 2.5 rem. By adding the padding left, this is just going to give it a little bit of an indent away from the description side. Like we did for the contact links, we want each bullet point to have a margin top, but we don't want to apply the margin top to the first child. So we can target the experience bullets using the child selector and then say what we don't want to select the first child. Then we can go ahead and add a margin top of 0.5 rem. And as you can tell, now a margin is applied to all of the bullet points except for the first child. Now we need to go ahead and style the individual bullets. So we'll target the experience bullet, changing the color to the variable neutral 8, and setting the font size, line height, and font weight. Now that we have our desktop styles done, let's go ahead and style this for small screens. To start, we'll head into our small breakpoints media query, and below the contact styles, we'll go ahead and add a comment saying that this is where the experience styles start. Below the contact styles, we'll add a comment showing that this is where the experience styles start. First, we want to go ahead and target the experience class, changing the padding left and the padding right to 1 rem. Now we want the position and company to have the default block style, so let's go ahead and change the experience position to have a display of block. Then we'll go ahead and make it smaller by setting a font size and line height. We'll do something similar for the experience company, setting display to block, font size, line height, and removing the margin left. We also want to apply a margin top to space the company from the position. Then we'll go ahead and style the experience description, making the margin top smaller and also making the font size and line height smaller as well. For the experience bullets container, we'll go ahead and make the margin top here smaller and also change the padding left to be a little smaller as well. We also want to decrease the size between each individual bullet, so we'll go ahead and make the margin top here to 0.5 rem. Last, we want to make sure the text and size of bullets are also smaller, so we'll target the experience bullet, changing the font size and line height here as well. And that's it for the experience section. In the next section, we'll focus on the skills. To start on our skills section, we'll come to the closing tag on our experience section and add a new comment that says that this is the start of our skills section. Then we'll create an open and close section with a class of skills. Inside here, we'll create a container, giving it a class of skills container. Then we'll create the same header that we did for our experience section. This time, all we need to do is change the text inside to say skills. Below this header tag, we'll create one more container called skills list. Here is where we're going to list all of our different skills and paragraph tags. So we'll go ahead and create an open and close paragraph tag and give it a class of skills item. Then we'll pass in the text for that specific skill. Then I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this for all the skills that we want to include in our resume. And that's it for the HTML. Now let's go ahead and move on to styling this in CSS. Below our experience styles, we'll create a new comment saying that this is where our skill styles start. First, we'll target the skills container, and we'll set the padding to top, right, left, and bottom. Next, we'll target the skills container class, setting the max width to 67 rem. Then we'll add a margin of top and bottom to 0 and left and right to auto. Again, once this container reaches a max width of 67 rem, it's going to be centered on the screen. Now we're going to style the skills list using CSS Grid to define where the skill items should be placed. The first thing we need to do is define how many columns we want in our grid. To do this, we can use the repeat function, saying that we want to repeat 4 times the 1FR unit. Essentially what this does, it looks how much space is available inside of our skill list container and divides it into 4 equal sections. Those 4 equal sections is going to be where each skill item is going to be placed. Then we want to set a gap, setting the row to 1 rem and the column to 2 rem. So to the left and right, each item is going to be spaced out by 2 rem, and from the top and bottom, they'll be spaced out by 1 rem. Then to space out the skill list from the header, we'll add a margin top of 0.5 rem. Now we'll style each individual skills item by changing the color first to the neutral 8. Then we'll change the font size, line height, and font weight. Now we style the skills section for larger screens, let's go ahead and apply these small breakpoint styles in our media query. We'll come inside of our media query, and below the experience class, we'll add a new section saying that this is where the skill style starts. The only class we're changing here is on the skills list, and instead of 4 columns, we want there to be 2 columns once the screen reaches a smaller size. So we'll set grid template columns using the repeat function, but this time instead of repeating the fraction unit 4 times, we're only going to do it twice. If you scroll down now, you'll see that the skills is broken up into 2 columns, each item taking up its own column. You may have noticed that we haven't styled our header yet, so let's come up where we just added these skill styles, and below we'll create a new comment saying that this is where the section header styles start. First, we'll target the header, setting the padding top, right, bottom, and left. Next, we want to add a border top, setting it to 2 pixel width, solid style, and the color to the variable neutral 3. Now let's go ahead and style the header text. To do that, we'll target the header title, changing the color to the neutral 7. Then we'll set the font size and line height. I also want to increase the spacing between each letter, and we can do that with the letter spacing property, setting it to 0.1 em. An em unit in CSS is a relative unit of measurement that's based on the font size of the parent element. So in this case, setting the letter spacing to 0.1 em is essentially setting it to 10% of the header title font size. When we save that, we can see the letters are now spaced apart. The next thing we want to do is we want to transform the text to be uppercase. And last, we want to change the font weight to 400. Now that our project's done, let's go ahead and commit the code to GitHub and host our project on Vercel. Eventually, you'll want to install Git on your computer and learn how to use Git to commit changes while you're coding. But for now, let's go ahead and push this up to GitHub and then connect it to Vercel and then host our project. To start, you'll need to sign up for a free GitHub account. Once you sign up, come over here on this icon and create a new repository. Then we'll create a repo name. Add a description if you want, and select if you want this to be public or private. Then click on Create Repository. Below you'll see instructions on doing this from the command line, but what we want to do is click on Upload an existing file. Then we want to head to where our project is on our computer, and don't select the folder, but select the items inside the folder, and then drop them on this file Upload. Once it's uploaded, you can add a commit message, but I'll keep the default message and then click on Commit Changes. Now our code is on GitHub, we can go to Vercel to host the project. The first thing you want to do is sign up for a free Vercel account and connect your GitHub. Once you do that, come over and click on Add New and select Project. Make sure the right GitHub account is selected here, and you'll also see the Git repo that we just created. On this, go ahead and click on Import. And like I mentioned earlier, Vercel is going to take care of hosting all of our static files on a CDN, so they're delivered as fast as possible to our users. All we need to do now is click on Deploy and let Vercel take care of the rest. And just like that, our project's now ready on Vercel. We can click on the image to open our new project, and again, everything looks perfect. And that's it for this video. If you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, and be sure to check out our free and premium code challenges and solutions on Skillthrive.com. Again, I'm Hunter from Skillthrive, and I'll see you in the next one.